All right, Kevin. Well, if you've ever been on Blue Sky or Apple podcast reviews, you know that sometimes the Hard Fork podcast does get criticized.
No.
Yes. And one of the big criticisms that we hear is, hey, it really seems like you guys are hyping up AI too much. You are not sort of being adversarial enough against this industry. And we wish you would bring on more critics who would give voice to that idea and really engage with that in a serious way.
Yes, we hear this in our email inbox every single week. And this week, we're actually going to do something about it because our producer, Rachel Cohn, while we were out on vacation, has been cooking up this segment. So, Rachel, come on in and tell us what you've done.
Hello. Thanks for having me on. And thank you guys for being such good sports. And as far as I know, not advocating to fire me.
Well, the segment isn't over yet. So,
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what you did and how you came up with this idea.
Yeah. So like you guys said, part of this is about responding to these listener emails that we've been getting. I think part of it is also this feeling that AI debate is getting more polarized. And also I think there's just sort of a personal level thing going on for me, which is I feel like I am increasingly spiraling when I think about AI, and I'm steeped in this the way you guys are. Because, we're working on this show together. But I increasingly feel like you guys are finding ways to be more hopeful or optimistic than I am. And so, part of my goal with this was actually to be like, okay, what's going on here? Like, how are you guys arriving at this slightly different place than I am? So what I did is I spent the last few weeks reaching out to prominent AI researchers and writers who I knew disagreed with you. Some of these people have, argued with you online before, so I don't think you'll be totally surprised. But I wanted this to be on hard mode for you guys. So I specifically sought out people who I hope are going to challenge and provoke you, because the truth is that they agree with you on, a lot of basic things about AI. These are all people who think that AI is highly capable, that it's impressive in some ways, that it could be super transformative. But I think they have slightly different views in terms of maybe some of the harms that they're most concerned about, or some of the benefits that they're more skeptical about. So I think we should just get into it.
Okay, let's hear from our first critic. Rachel, who'd you talk to?
Yeah, so I thought we should start with one of the widest ranging critiques, and this is probably the most forceful criticism that came in. So this one comes from Brian Merchant, who is a tech journalist who writes a lot about AI for his newsletter, Blood in the Machine. As I understand, Kevin, he has kind of engaged with you a bit online about some of your reporting. Is that right?
Yes, I've known Brian for years. I really like and respect his work, although we have some disagreements about AI. But yeah, he has been emailing us saying you guys should have more critics on. I sort of jokingly said that I would have him on, but only if he let us give him a cattle brand that said "Feel the AGI," and the conversation sort of trailed off after that.
Okay, great. I was wondering about that because, he's going to make a reference to that in the critique that he wages. So, I asked Brian to record his critique for us, and I will play it for you now.
Hello, gentlemen. This is Brian Merchant. I'm a tech journalist and author of the book and newsletter Blood in the Machine. And first of all, I want to say that I still want a whole show about the Luddites and why they were right. And I think it's only fair because Kevin recently threatened to stick me with a cattle brand that says "Feel the AGI." Which brings me to my concern. How are you feeling about feeling the AGI right now? Because I worry that this narrative that presents super powerful corporate AI products as inevitable is doing your listeners a disservice. Using the AGI language and frameworks preferred by the AI companies does seem to suggest that you're aligning with their vision and risks promoting their product roadmap outright. So when you say, as my future cattle brand reads, that you feel the AGI, do you worry that you're serving this broader sales pitch, encouraging execs and management to embrace AI, often at the expense of working people? Okay, thanks, fellas.
Okay, this is an interesting one. And first, I think I need to define what I mean when I say feel the AGI, because
what do you
this
mean?
is a phrase that is often sort of used half jokingly, but I think really does sort of mean something inside the sort of San Francisco AI bubble. To me, feeling the AGI does not mean like I think AI is cool and good, or that the companies building it are on the right track, or even that it is inevitable or sort of a natural consequence of what we're seeing today. The way I use it is essentially shorthand for like, I am starting to internalize the capabilities of these systems and how much more powerful they will be if current trends continue. And I'm just starting to prepare and plan for that world, including the things that might go really wrong in that world. So that to me is like what feeling the AGI means. It is not an endorsement of some like corporate roadmap. It is just like, I am taking in what is happening. I am trying to extrapolate into the future as best I can. And I'm just trying to like get my mind around some of the more surreal possibilities that could happen in the next few years.
Do you ever worry that you are creating a sense that this is inevitable and that maybe people who may be inclined to resist that future are not empowered to do so?
I want to hear your view on this. I mean, my view on this is essentially that we have systems right now that several years ago people would have called AGI. That is not sort of making a projection out into the future. That's just looking at what exists today. And I think a sort of natural thing to do is to observe the rate of progress in AI and just ask, what if that continues? I don't think you have to believe in some far future scenario to believe that models will continue to get better along these predictable scaling curves. And so to me, the question of like, is this inevitable is just a question of like, is the money that is being spent today to develop bigger and better models going to result in the same kinds of capabilities gains that we've seen over the past few years? But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think Brian's question is a good one, and I understand what he's saying when he says, look, AGI is an industry term. If you come on your show every week and talk about it, you wind up sounding like you're just sort of like amplifying the industry voice, maybe at the expense of other voices. I think this is just a tricky thing to navigate because, as you said, Kevin, you look at the rate of progress in these systems, and it is exponential. And it does seem like it is important to extrapolate out to as far as you can go and start asking yourself, what kind of world are we going to be living in then? I think a reason that both of us do that is that we do see so many obvious harms that will come from that world, starting with labor automation, which I know is a huge concern of Brian's, and which we talk about all the time on this show as maybe one of the primary near-term risks of AI. So, I want to think a bit more about what we can do to signal to folks that we are not just here to amplify the industry voice. But I think the answer to Brian's question of sort of why talk about AGI like it's likely to happen is that in one form or another, I think both of us just do think we are likely to get powerful systems that can automate a lot of labor.
Yes.
And we would like to explore the consequences of such a world.
Totally. And I think it's actually beneficial for workers to understand the trajectory that these systems are on. They need to know what's happening and what the executives at these companies are saying about the labor replacing potential of this technology. I actually read Brian's book about the Luddites. I thought it was great. And I think it's very instructive that the Luddites were not in denial about the power of the technology that was challenging their jobs, right? They didn't look at these like automated weaving machines and go, oh, that'll never get more powerful. That'll never be able to replace us. Look at all the stupid mistakes it's making. They sensed correctly that this technology was going to be very useful and allow factories to produce goods much more efficiently. And they said, we don't like that. We don't like where this is headed. They were able to sort of project out into the future that they would struggle to compete in that world and take steps to fight against it. So I like to think that if hard fork had existed in the 1800s, we would have been sort of encouraging people to wake up to the increasing potential automation caused by these factory machines. And I think that's what we're doing today.
Yeah. And one more question. Like, I would just love to see the sort of like leftist labor movement work on AI tools that can replace managers. It's like right now it feels like all of this is coming from the top down, but there could be a sort of AI that would work from the bottom up.
Totally.
Something to think about. All right. Let's hear our next critique, Rachel.
Okay, wait, can I ask one more
sure.
question on this
Yeah.
front? Because I feel like one thing that it seems like Brian is really just curious about is like whether you have ever considered using language other than AGI. Like why use AGI when some people take issue with it?
I think it is good to have a shorthand for a theoretical future when there is a digital tool that can do most human labor, where there is a sort of digital assistant that you could hire in place of hiring a human. I just think that is a useful concept. If you're the sort of person who thinks that, well, no, we will just absolutely never get there, I kind of don't know what to say to you, because we don't think that that's inevitable, but we do think it's worth considering that it might be true. So if folks who hate the term AGI want to propose a different term, I could use another term. But my sense is that the quibble is less with the terminology and more with the idea that any of this might happen.
Yeah, I also don't think the term AGI is perfect. It's sort of lost a lot of meaning. People define it in a million different ways. If there were another better term that we could use instead, that would signal what AGI signals, and the set of ideas and motivations that sort of swirl around that concept, I'd be all for it. But I think that term has just proven to be very sticky. It is not just something that industry people talk about. It's something that people talk about in academia, in futurism circles. It is sort of this rallying cry for this entire industry, and it is in some ways like the holy grail of this entire movement. So I don't think it's sort of playing on corporate terms to use a term that these companies use. In particular, because a lot of the companies don't like it either, but it is the easiest and simplest way to shorthand the idea.
Cool. Okay. So this next person that I want you guys to hear her criticism is Alison Gopnik. So you guys, of course, know this. Alison Gopnik is this, very distinguished psychologist at UC Berkeley. She's a developmental psychologist, so she does a lot of work specifically in studying how children learn and then applying that to, how AI models might learn, how AI models can be, developed. And she's also one of the leading figures pushing this idea that we have actually talked a little bit about on the show, which is this idea that AI is what she calls a cultural technology.
I'm Alison Gopnik at the University of California at Berkeley. The common way of thinking about AI, which is reflected in the New York Times coverage as well, is to think about AI systems as if they were individual intelligent agents, the way people are. But my colleagues and I think this approach to the current systems of AI is fundamentally misconceived. The current large language models and large vision models, for example, are really cultural technologies like writing or print or internet search itself. What they do is let some group of people access the information that other groups of people have articulated, the same way that print lets us understand and learn from other people. Now, these kinds of cultural technologies are extremely important and can change the world for better or for worse, but they're very different from super intelligent agents of the sort that people imagine when they think about AI. And thinking about the current systems as in terms of cultural technology would let us both approach them and regulate them and deal with them in a much more productive way.
Casey, what do you make of this one?
So I appreciate the question. If Alison were here, I would ask her how she thinks that thinking about these systems as, quote, cultural technologies would let us regulate them or think about them differently. I think there are ways in which we absolutely cover AI as a cultural technology around here. We talk about its increasing use in creative industries like Hollywood, like in the music industry, to create forms of culture, about the risks that AI poses to the web and all the people who publish on the web. So that's one way that I think about AI as a cultural technology, and I do think that we reflect that on the show. Now, I do hear in Alison's question a hint of the stochastic parrots argument, which is that if I'm understanding right, what I'm hearing is this technology is essentially just a huge amalgamation of human knowledge, and you can sort of dip in and grab a little piece of it here, a piece of it there. And what I think that leaves out is the emerging properties that some of these systems have, the way that they can solve problems that are not in their training data, the way that they can teach themselves to play games that they have never seen before. when I look at that technology, I think that does seem like something that is pretty close to an individual intelligent agent. So this is one where I would welcome more conversation with Alison about what she means, but that is my initial response. Kevin?
These systems are built on the foundation of human knowledge, right? They are trained on like all of the text on the internet and lots of intellectual output that humans over the centuries have produced. But I think the analogy starts to break down a little bit when you start thinking about more recent systems. A printing press, writing, the internet, these are technologies that are sort of stable and inert. They can't form their own goals and pursue them, but an AI agent can. Right now, AI agents are not super intelligent. They're very brittle. They don't really work in a lot of ways. But I think once you give an AI system a goal and the ability to act on its own to meet that goal, it's not really a passive object anymore. It is an actor in the world, and you can call that, a cultural technology, or you can call that an intelligent agent. But I think it's not just like a printing press or a PC or another piece of technology that these things are sometimes compared to. I think it's something new and different when it can actually go out in the world and do things.
Yeah, I mean, you think about like OpenAI's operator, for example, like it can, book a plane ticket or a hotel room. Is that a cultural technology? Like, I don't know. Like, that feels like something different to me.
Yeah.
All right, next up.
Okay, so this next question is about the scientific and medical breakthroughs that could come from AI. This question comes from Douthat, who is an opinion columnist here at the New York Times and the host of the podcast Interesting Times. And he's been interviewing a lot of people connected to the AI world.
Hey guys, it's your colleague Ross Douthat. And I'm curious about what, if anything, you think limits AI's ability to predict and understand incredibly complex and chaotic and sometimes one-of-a-kind systems. And just to take two examples, I'm thinking about, on the one hand, our ability to predict the weather in advance, and on the other hand, our ability to predict which treatments and drugs will work inside the insane, individualized complexity of a human immune system. Those both seem to me like cases where just throwing more and more raw intelligence or computational power at a problem may just run into some inherent limits, that we'll get cancer cures and get better weather prediction, but certain things will always remain in the realm of uncertainty or the realm of trial and error. Do you guys agree, or are you more optimistic about AI's ability to bring even the most chaotic and complex realms into some kind of understanding?
So there are like two questions here. One is there some upper bound on how well these systems will be able to predict? And to me, the answer is maybe. Like, I don't know that we'll ever have an AI system that can predict the weather with 100% certainty. At the same time, I did a little bit of Googling before we logged on. AI weather predicting models are really good, and they're getting better all the time. And meteorologists say that their field has rarely felt so exciting because they're just able to make better predictions than they have before. I think you're seeing something similar with medicine, where we featured stories on the podcast about the way that this is leading to new drug discovery. It is leading to improvements in diagnoses. So, yeah, I mean, if you're looking for reasons to be excited about AI, I would point to stuff like that as obviously useful in people's lives.
But it's still not perfect, right? And it may be that getting from kind of a very reliable weather forecast to a perfect weather forecast would require some, fundamental breakthrough, something in quantum mechanics, some new understanding of how, various particles are interacting out in the atmosphere. But getting like way better forecasts might be good enough for most people. And I think the same could be said of medicine. Maybe this is not going to cure every disease on Earth. Maybe there will still be things about the human body we don't understand. But I do think I agree with you that like people who work in this field are more excited than they've been in a long time, because they just see how much AI allows them to explore and test.
Yeah, and maybe one other question you can just add in here that I think is relevant is, are these systems better than a person is, right? Because if they are, then we probably want to use them.
Can I just ask, how much of your optimism about AI hinges on like AI being able to give us either these like scientific or medical breakthroughs?
I think science and medicine are just maybe the two most obvious places where this stuff will be good. It's like if you told me that you could cure cancer and many other diseases, I'm just personally willing to put up with a lot more social disruption. If it can never do those things, despite all the promises that have been made, then I'll be super mad. I'll curse on the podcast.
Yeah, I personally, my own AI optimism does not hinge on AI going out there and solving all of the unproved math theorems and curing all of the diseases. I think that even if it were just to speed up the process of discovery, even if all it were doing was accelerating the work that chemists and biomedical researchers, people looking into climate change were doing, I think that would be reason enough for optimism, because so much of what acts as a bottleneck on progress in science and medicine is just that it's really slow and hard, and you need to like build these wet labs and do a bunch of tests and wait for the tests to come back and run these clinical trials. And I think one of the things that was exciting about our conversation with Patrick Collison at the live show the other day was when he was talking about this sort of virtual cell that they're building, where you can just kind of build a virtual environment using AI that can sort of allow you to run these experiments in silico, as they say, rather than needing to like go out and test it on a bunch of fruit flies or rats or, you know, humans or whatever. And you could just kind of shorten the feedback loop and take more bites at the apple.
Absolutely. There was a story in Quanta magazine this week that said that AI hasn't led to any new discoveries in physics just yet, but it is designing new experiments and spotting patterns in data in the way that Kevin was just describing in ways that physicists are just finding really useful. So I think it's clear that AI is already shortening some of those timelines. You know what's great about this is now instead of your own internal voice criticizing yourself, you can kind of externalize it and realize that all your fears are true and people actually are criticizing you all the time behind your back. Yeah.
Isn't it really nice?
It's so nice.
What a great idea.
Well, on that note, let's keep going. Are you guys ready for the next critic?
Hit me with it.
My name is Claire Leibowitz, and I lead the AI and Media Integrity program at the Partnership on AI. I keep coming back to something that I struggle with in my own reaction to your pieces. I found myself nodding when you both critique AI for being biased, persuasive, sycophantic. But then I start thinking about how humans around me behave, and they do all these things too. So I'm wondering, are we ultimately critiquing AI for being too much like us? In which domain should we expect these systems to actually transcend human limitations? And are there others where it may be valuable for them to reflect our true nature? And most importantly, why aren't we spending more time figuring out who is best suited to decide these things and empowering them?
I mean, that last question is super important. I'm a big democracy guy, and I want there to be a public role in creating this AI future. I want people who have opinions about this stuff to talk about it online, yes, but also run for office and put together policy proposals and then get into office and like pass laws and regulations. I got into journalism because I wanted to play my own role in that process of helping to inform people and then hopefully in some very small way, like influencing public policy. So that's my answer to that question.
Yeah, I agree with that. I want like people from lots of disciplines to be weighing in on this stuff, not just by posting online and writing, op-eds in the newspaper, but by actually getting into the process of designing and building these systems. I want philosophers, ethicists. I want sociologists and anthropologists advising these companies. I want this to be like a global democratic, multidisciplinary effort to create these systems. And I don't want it to just be a bunch of engineers in San Francisco designing these systems with no input from the outside world.
Absolutely. And if, a bunch of people, listen to the things that we and others talk about and think, man, I really don't like this AI stuff at all. I don't want it to replace anyone's job. I want to form a political movement and seek office and try to oppose that. I think that would be awesome. Like, we need to have that fight in public. And right now, far too few people are participating in that conversation. So I totally agree with that. Now, let me address the other part of Claire's question, though, which is, are AI systems just a reflection of us? Well, number one, I think that the answer is yes. Here's where I think it gets problematic. If you have a human friend, sometimes they're going to be very supportive and nice to you. Sometimes they're going to bust your chops and criticize you. Sometimes they're going to give you really hard feedback and tell you something that you didn't want to hear. This is not what AI systems do. And so where I get concerned is we're starting to read more stories about young people in particular turn into these chatbots to answer every single question, developing these really intense emotional relationships with them. And I am worried that it is not preparing them for a future where they're going to be interacting with people who do not always have their best interests at heart. Or maybe they could have an amazing relationship with, but maybe this person is a little bit prickly and you need to sort of learn how to navigate them. So that is where I get really concerned, is that these systems, while they're unreliable in so many ways, they are quite reliably sycophantic. And I just think that that creates a bunch of issues that humans don't mostly have.
Yeah, and I think what I would add to that is that I don't want AI to mirror all of humanity's values, the positive and the negative. I want it to mirror the best of us, right? The better angels of our nature, as Abraham Lincoln said. I want that to be what these AI companies are striving to design.
As opposed to, say, Mecha Hitler.
Yes, because that is also a set of values that humans have. And so sometimes when I hear people at these AI companies talk about aligning AI systems with human values, I'm like, well, which humans? Because I can think of some pretty bad ones whose values I don't want to see adopted into these systems.
Yeah, well, that's called woke AI, and it's illegal now.
All right, Rachel, let's hear from someone else.
Okay, this is the very last one. You guys are doing great. So this final question comes from friend of the pod, Max Reed, who, of course, has the newsletter Read Max. I thought his question is really great because he's really interested in how you think about discerning between what's hype and what's not, and how you trust your own instincts and where your confidence comes from. And so let's hear Max.
Hi guys, it's your old friend Max Reed. I was originally going to ask about Kevin's a cappella career in college, but my understanding is that the woke higher-ups at the New York Times won't allow me to ask such dangerous questions. So instead, I want to ask you about AI by way of asking you about crypto. You guys were both pretty actively involved in covering the Web3 era, the sort of crypto boom of the pandemic, NFTs, Bored Apes, all this stuff. And very little of that, despite the massive hype around it at the time, has really panned out as promised, at least as far as I can tell. And what I'm wondering is how you guys feel about that hype and about your coverage of that hype from the perspective of 2025. Are there regrets you have? Are there lessons you feel like you've learned? And especially when you look at the current state of AI coverage and hype, not just your own coverage, but in general, do you think or worry that it falls prey to any of the same mistakes? I want to caveat this question by saying the easy mode of this question is to just say the technology is totally different, so it's a very different thing. And I want to put it to you in hard mode because I don't want to hear about how the tech is different. What I'm interested in is hearing about you guys and your work as journalists. How do you approach this industry? How do you establish your own credibility? And how do you assess the claims being made by investors and entrepreneurs? Can't wait to hear the answer. Bye.
Love this question. What have I learned? To touch on the crypto piece without touching on the technology, here's what I'll say. Ultimately, what persuaded me in 2021 that crypto was really worth paying attention to was the density of talent that it attracted. So many people I knew who had previously worked on really valuable companies were quitting their jobs to go build new crypto companies. And what I believed and said out loud at the time was it would just be really surprising if all of those talented people failed to create a lot of really valuable companies. In the end, they did not produce a lot that I did find valuable. Although, as we've been covering on the show recently, crypto has not gone away. And thanks to the fact that the industry has captured the government, it is now more valuable than ever. So that is what I would say about that time in crypto. And I do think that some of that argument ports over to AI because certainly I also know a lot of people that quit their jobs working at social media companies, for example, who are now working on AI. Here's what I would say about hype in covering AI. I think that a good podcast about technology needs to do two things. One is to give you very grounded coverage of stuff that is happening right now. So I'm thinking about in recent months when Pete Wells came on to talk about how chefs are using AI in their restaurants, or Roy Lee coming on and talking about the cheating technology that he's building, or Kevin talking about what he's vibe coding. I even think about the emergency episode that we did about DeepSeek, which I think actually was kind of an effort to unhype the technology a bit, while giving you a really grounded sense of what it was and why people were so excited about it, right? So that's one thing I think we need to do. The other thing I think we need to do is to just tell you what the industry says is going to happen. I think it is important to get leaders of these companies in the room and just hear their visions, because there is some chance that a version of it will come true, right? So this is the thing that we're doing when we bring on a Sam Altman or a Demis Hassabis or the founders of the Mechanized company, which you probably heard in our interview. I was not particularly impressed with that vision, but I think it is useful to the audience to hear what these folks think that they are doing. And of course, we want to push back on them a bit, but I have just always appreciated a journalism that gives airtime to visions and lets me think about it, lets me disagree with it, right? So that is how I think about hype in general. We want to tell you mostly what is happening on the ground, but we do want to tell you what the CEOs are telling us all the time is going to happen. And then we want you to sort of interrogate the space in between, right? That we actually have to live in.
Yeah, I will say I feel pretty good about the way that I covered crypto back in 2021. There's only really one crypto story that I truly regret writing, and that is a story about this crypto company Helium that was trying to do this sort of convoluted thing with these crypto-powered Wi-Fi routers, and I just failed on that story. I failed to ask basic journalistic questions. It turned out after the fact, we learned that Helium had basically claimed that it had a bunch of partnerships with a bunch of different companies. And I just didn't call the companies to say, hey, is this company lying about being affiliated with you? It just didn't occur to me that they would be so blatantly misleading me about the state of their business. And so I do regret that I would chalk up less to buying into crypto hype and more just to not making a few more calls that would have saved me from some grief.
Yeah.
The lesson I took from crypto reporting is that real world use matters. So much of crypto and the hype around it consisted of these kind of abstract ideas and these vague sort of promises and white papers. And then when you actually dug in and looked at who was using it and what they were using it for, it was criminals, it was speculators, it was people trying to get rich on their Bored Ape collection. So now when I cover AI, I really try to talk to people who are civilians using this technology about how they are using it. And whenever possible, I try to use it myself before I sort of form an opinion on it. I think the crypto era was in some ways a traumatic incident for the tech journalism community. I think a lot of our peers, and maybe to even a certain extent you and I, felt like we were duped, felt like we fell for something, like we'd wasted all of our time trying to understand and explain this technology, taking this stuff seriously only to have it all come crashing down. And I worry that a lot of journalists took the wrong lesson from what happened with crypto. The sort of lesson that I think a lot of journalists took was to be blanket skeptical of all new technologies, to sort of assume that it's all smoke and mirrors, that everyone is lying to you, and that it's not really going to be worth your time to dig in and try to understand something. And I see a lot of that attitude reflected in some of the AI coverage I see today. And so while I take Max's point that I think we should always be learning from our mistakes and maybe things that we swallowed too uncritically in the past, I think that in some ways what we're seeing now today with AI is kind of sort of overcorrecting on that point. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that there is a bit of an overcorrection, but I also think that many journalists have just realized that what used to be a really small industry that mostly concerned itself with helping you print your photos and make a spreadsheet is now something much bigger and more consequential and has just been bad for a lot of people. And so it makes them hesitant to trust someone who comes along and says, hey, I'm going to cure all human disease. I think that a role that we both try to occupy in the sort of AI journalism world is to say, we take seriously the CEOs who say that they're building something really powerful, and crucially, we think it will be powerful in bad ways.
Yes.
And we want to talk to you about those bad ways, such as you may lose your job, or it will enable new forms of cyber attacks and frauds that you may fall victim to, or it will burn our current education system down to the ground so it has to be rebuilt from scratch. That one, maybe there will be some positive along the way. But I feel like week after week on the show, we are trying to show you ways in which this thing is going to be massively disruptive, and that gets framed as hype in a way that I just think is a little bit silly. Like, in 2010, imagine I'd written a story about Facebook and how one day it would have billions of users and undermine democracy and give a bunch of teenagers eating disorders. Like, would that have been hype? Sort of. Would that have been accepting the terms of the social media founders and accepting their language around, growth? Yes. But would it have been useful? Would I be proud that I wrote that story? I think so. So I'm willing to accept the idea that you and I do buy into the vision of very powerful AI more than many of our peers in tech journalism. But the reason that we're doing that is we want to remind you what happened the last time one of these technologies grew really quickly and got into everyone's hands and became the way that people interface with the digital world. It didn't go great. We already know that these companies are not going to be regulated in any meaningful way. The AI action plan is designed basically to ensure that. And so to the extent that we can play a positive role, I think it is just going to be in talking to people about those consequences. And if the consequence of that is that people say that, we're on the side of hype, like I will just accept the criticism.
Well, thank you guys so much for doing this. And thank you also to our critics for taking the time to talk to me. I thought we could end by just talking about actually whether you guys have any questions for each other, or one of the big goals of this is to kind of map where you guys stand relative to other thinkers. So I'm curious, if you guys have any questions for each other about how your views on AI are actually different from each other.
I think I have longer timelines than Kevin does. I think Kevin talks about AGI in a way that makes it seem very imminent. And I think I'm more confident that it's going to take several years. And maybe more than several, right? Like maybe this is like a 5 to 10 or even 15-year project. So I think that's the main way that I notice disagreeing with Kevin.
I think that we also disagree about regulation and how possible or advisable it is to have the government step in and try to control the development and deployment of AI systems. I think that you are informed by your years of covering social media and seeing regulators grapple with and mostly fail to regulate that wave of technology. But I think you are also a person who has a lot of hope and optimism about institutions and wants there to be democratic accountability into powerful technology. I share that view, but I also don't think there's a chance in hell that our present government constructed the way it is with the kind of pace that it is used to regulating things at can regulate AI on anything approaching a relevant timescale. I've become fairly pessimistic about the possibility of meaningful regulation of AI, and I think that's a place where we differ.
I think we do disagree there, because I think that we had the makings of meaningful regulation under the Biden administration, where they were making very simple demands like you need to inform us when you're training a model of a certain size. There need to be other transparency requirements. And I think you can get from there to a better world. And instead, we've sort of unwound all the way back to, hey, if you want to create the largest and most powerful model in the world, you can do that. You don't have to tell anybody if it creates new risk for bioweapons and other risks. You don't have to tell anybody. You can put it out in the world. Right now, there are many big AI labs that are racing to get the most powerful AI that they can into everyone's hands with absolutely no safeguards. So if you're telling me that we can't create a better world than that, I am going to disagree with you.
Yeah.
Go yourself.
Well, thank God you guys disagree because it makes the podcast more interesting. And thank you guys seriously for doing this. I think given how much of the like AI conversation can feel really disempowering in this moment, one thing that gives me a feeling of like a little bit more control is really trying to like map out the debates where people stand relative to each other, because it ultimately helps me figure out, you know, like what I think about AI, where I think the future is going. And that's at least one thing I feel sort of empowered to do.
And that's what we want to do. Like, truly, we want everyone to come to their own understanding of where they sit at the various, you know, intersections of these discourses. Like, I think Kevin and I identify as reporters first. We don't have all the answers. That's why we usually bring on a guest every week to try to get smarter about some subject, right? So I think a really bad outcome for the podcast is that people think of us as pundits. I think of us as like, you know, curious people with informed points of view, but we always try to be open to changing our minds.
Yes. Like a large language model, we aim to improve from version to version.
As we add new parameters and and computing power.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, that's the end of this clip. If you liked what you saw, head on over to our page and subscribe, and you can get the full podcast. We do a show like this almost every week on tech and the future. Head on over there now and subscribe.